welcome back. In the last video, we took a look at arithmetic operators, logical operators, and then also some things with variables, naming conventions, editing them using the fix command, and then also updating them using explicit terminology. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at some common R commands. Hopefully we should be squeezing in about 20 of these. Let's go ahead and start with one that's probably one of the most useful, especially when you're new to R, and that is help, and then also another one which is example. For help, we have two different ways of doing this. The first one is to start with a question mark and then type out whatever the function or method name is you're interested in. So in this case, we're going to take a look at seek, which we used in the very first video just as an illustration to produce sequences. So we'll hit enter twice because the first time we had that prompt, we had to clear that away. Now that we hit enter, we can see all of this help documentation over here for this particular function. Alright, so we get a description, some usage, arguments. The arguments is actually one of the most important parts because when you're unfamiliar with a particular function or method, you may not have any idea what arguments it can possibly take, let alone what values to use for those arguments or what they're for. So that's what this is, and that'll give you some insight into how to use this particular function. And then the details help to tell you what that'll do. At the very bottom, we can see some examples, and we're actually about to see something even a little better than that in just a moment. Alright, so that's our first option for using help. I'm going to click on this home button again just so we can see how this next one gives us the exact same thing. So I'm going to do help and seek, but notice that it actually puts it in quotes. So we want whatever these functions are to be in quotes. We'll hit enter, and we get the same thing over here. Okay, now for this other command, example. So we're going to do seek, and notice it wants it in quotes again, so we're going to hit enter. This time what it does is it actually gives us a printout to the console, giving us a few examples, some actual run examples of this function. Now, in this case, we have no variables assigned in any of these examples. They just run it. If any example ever has a variable assigned, it'll actually show up over here in the global environment. You can ignore that X. It has nothing to do with this. That's one that I had produced. Okay, so all of these, let's take a look at just a couple pretty quickly because we looked at this in the first video. We have the sequence of 0 through 1, and it fills in everything in between a number of elements so that we have 11 total. So it'll increment at just the right values in order to give us 11 elements in this output from 0 to 1. And similarly, we have this down here from 1 to 9, and we increment by 2. So instead of telling it how many elements we want, we tell it how much we want it to increment by. So now we have 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. And we can also increment by float values, like here we use pi. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the next one now. For the next command, we are going to use it's rep, which is for replace. Or replicate, not replace, replicate, sorry. I was actually planning on saying repeat. So repeat or replicate values. So if we want to, then we can replicate the value 5 3 times, run that, we get 5, 5, 5. We can do something similar. So we have x up here, right? I'll just run x. X is a vector 1, 2, 3. So let's say that we want to repeat values in this vector. We can either repeat the whole vector itself. We can repeat out to a certain length, but let's go ahead and repeat the whole thing. So x, and let's repeat it twice. Okay, so what we have is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So what this did is instead of repeating element by element, by just leaving this value as 2, then it repeats the whole vector 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We can also do length out instead, kind of like we had with sequence. And wow, I can't type length at all apparently. Okay, so length out, let's go ahead and set that to 5. So what that gives us is it replicates the vector, so it'll take the whole thing and it'll replicate it out to a maximum length of 5. And that's why we end with just 1, 2, because that gives us 5 total elements. Another option is to use each as an argument instead of length out. So let's replicate x again, and we're going to say each equal 2. So it replicates each element twice, 1, 1, 2, 2, and 3, 3. Okay, so let's see, one more here is, because this is a vector, what we can do is if we pass a same length vector, then we can actually tell it how many times to replace each element. So we're going to, or I keep saying replace, to replicate. So we're going to replicate the first element once, the second one twice, and the third element 3 times. So this is actually the same vector as x. So what we get is 1, 2, 2, and then 3, 3, 3. And just to illustrate that we don't have to pass in a physical vector, we can pass in a variable as well. Let's do x, because x has the same values as this one. So that'll give us the same result. Okay, cool. So that's a really handy command to have. Handy, of course, but it doesn't mean you're going to use it often. Totally depends on the projects that you're working on. The next command is actually one we've already been using quite a bit, and that is the C, or combine. So we've already seen how we can combine values like 1, 2, and 3, or just this particular range here from 1 to 3. So that'll give us the same result. We can also combine things like characters. For example, we can do A and B. And then we're going to toss an integer in there, 1, for good measure, and we can see that it outputs all strings. That's because it determines what the likely data type is, and it tries to coerce all other data types into the same format. So here we get all strings. What this tells us is that we have to have all of the same data types in any of these vectors. Okay, so another way we can do this is actually, let's go ahead and put 2 ranges here just so we can see how we might do this. Let's have 7 to 9 as well. So instead of creating something like 2 rows, in case you expect that, we're just going to get one vector, and it combines everything that we throw into this C function into one long vector. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9. We're going to actually dig into this a lot more once we move on in future videos into vectors and matrices. For now, this is probably enough to get you started in playing around with it. Okay, so that is that function. Now, kind of a natural follow-up to that, since we just mentioned these data types, is to use the type of. So this type of function is going to tell us different values. So we have our variable x, which is this vector up here. So here we're going to do type of x. Instead of telling us it's a list or a vector, it says double. And that's because it's telling us what data types are inside of it. So they're type double. Okay, great. What else? What can we do? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at one more thing, and this also introduces us to a different command which creates something called a list. So we're going to have 1, 2, 3. We're setting a to that, by the way. So here is our variable a. Now let's do type of a. So this time it actually does tell us that it's a list, instead of where before, when it was a vector, we only had the types of elements that were inside of it. If we were to run this, we'd actually see that our list has these different elements. Don't worry about that for now, but if you want to, feel free to play around with it and try to access the different pieces. Okay, so we're going to move on to another one, which is the as, and this is where we're going to, sorry about that. Okay, so this is where we're actually going to try to cast different data types. So we've taken a look at checking data types, or maybe before we do, I'll do one more thing. So I'll do type of, and we're going to just enter 1. Let's type out the whole thing. So again, double. So just like with our vector. And just for good measure, I just want to do, let's actually do pi. So again, double. It's kind of treating all of these things just as doubles. Last one. Finally, something different, we have a character. Okay, great. So let's now do this as. So we have as character, integer, double. Those are the ones we're going to take a look at. So let's do as character. We can see it pop up here. Makes it easy for us. We don't have to type out the whole thing. So as character, so we're going to pass 1 in, and that'll return it as a character. So it actually casts this this integer, or actually an R, this double, to this character type. Also, we can do the same thing for if we had this value, 1.0, characters. So you'll notice that what it does is it actually strips that decimal, so we don't end up with quotes around 1.0, we just end up with the character or the digit 1 again as a character. One more illustration. We're going to toss pi in there because that's a little bit different. This is an irrational number, and so this actually will give us this string, 3.14159, etc. Doesn't have to be an irrational number though. So if we have 1.1, then it does give us 1.1. For the 1.0, it just assumes that all it needs to be is a 1 because it figures it is exactly 1 and the decimal does not matter. Let's take a look at another one. So let's do as integer, and in quotes we're going to pass 1. So now we actually get this integer here. Okay, great. Now one more. Of course I'm doing that thing where I just say one more even though I keep doing much more than one more. As integer, so we can pass in also that decimal and it'll throw that out for us. And let's do this though. Let's do a type of, because I'm sure you're curious. So as integer, let's do this. And now we finally see an integer instead of a double. Awesome. Okay, so that's pretty much everything we need to see, except for, oh, there's one more. Let's do as double. Okay, so if we want to do as double, we could do just this one, and we'll get this double right here. All right, next command. We actually have two folded into one here. So we have the ls and rm commands. The ls is going to show us the variables that we have up in our global environment. So we have a and we have x. And in fact, while we're discussing this, let's take a look in the upper right-hand corner again. When we have something like a list, we can see now that this variable has this, it looks like a play button actually, but this arrow next to it. If you click on it, then it'll expand it and it'll tell you the values for the different elements in the list. So we have this number 1, 2, and 3 inside of our list. Just a cool little thing for you to see there. Okay, so ls lists all of our variables there. We can, I'm going to create another one real quick. So I'm going to say y is equal to 1.3. So now we have 3 variables there. Let's go ahead and list those. Now we have the rm command. Rm removes variables from our environment. So if we want, we can remove y. And if we look in the environment in the upper right, it's no longer there. Same thing if we run ls. Alright, so what if we want to remove everything inside of our environment? Well, let's add y back in just so we have 3 to look at. It's a little more interesting. And we'll set that equal to 4.5. So we have 3 variables right now, and if we want to remove everything at once, we're going to run the rm command, but this time we're going to say list equal, and we're just going to pass it ls. So what that's going to do is ls will return this list of all of our variables. And so we could create a list manually if we wanted to, say, delete just a and x, but in this case, it's going to remove all of them. So we're going to run that. And now our global environment, if we see in the upper right, is totally clear. And ls will basically return nothing, just as character 0. So our global environment is now empty. We have no variables in there. That's what the rm and ls are good for. Let's see. We are pretty much running out of time here, so I think that is going to place a limit, and the rest of the commands that I wanted to show you are really kind of more useful later down the road once we're working with vectors and matrices. So we'll take a look at those in a future date. These are a lot of different common commands here that you can play around with. And yes, okay, great. So have fun with that, and I'll see you in the next video.